Hello again, this is Theresa Callaghan bringing you the second short presentation on help uncovered in adjectives. For those of you who were with me in the first presentation, I left you with the question, what is the purpose of cosmetics? So let's see if we can do something about this. So in simplified terms, we understand as people who work in R&D that you have the skin and that the skin is there to primarily, or certainly the role of cosmetics is there to primarily to care for the skin, the hair and the nails. And we achieve this based on our, shall we say, skin research and our findings that enable the development of new technologies, be they ingredients or delivery systems, and even measuring methods. And of course, the performance and the evidence of those products, and hopefully to address a genuine cosmetic need. But alongside that, of course, is the purpose of cosmetics is we believe that they also help to beautify the skin. So if you look at the picture on the right, clearly you can see that dry skin by adding a moisturizer looks a lot more improved. So we could actually say, should we say in consumer language, that not only have we improved dry skin, but you also look better because of it. And so we can describe the beautifying properties of cosmetics are either directly or indirectly a consequence of the above. But we should also be asking the question, well, what does that actually mean to the consumer? Because as scientists, we are very heavily involved, should we say, in the upper layer of that picture, whereas the lower layer we tend to leave to the more people who are interfacing with the consumer. And so whilst on the one hand, we do have, should we say, even though we have regulations that help define what beautifying the skin is and what the purpose of cosmetics is how does this really relate to the consumer, particularly when the consumers are becoming more and more, should we say, disaffected with cosmetics because they really need or they desire sort of this instant gratification, and so are seeking other interventions which they believe are cosmetic in order to achieve their goals. And one of the reasons why consumers, you know, if you follow social media, are not happy with their cosmetics is because they don't, shall we say, can't get to grips with the messaging. And as we know, people today, their biggest problem is that they don't listen to even read or understand when it comes to messages. They listen or read to reply. And a good example of this is this issue with older women feeling that beauty only values youth. And I remember that when I was starting out in the industry, that statement stood then. So here we are 33 years later, and that question or that need has not been answered fully to what consumers expect. And we can take this a little bit further because earlier this year, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who created the web, was really frustrated, and because, as we know, social media is basically spreading rubbish and misinformation rather than the truth. And certainly it is already started to have a damaging effect of not only on the beauty industry, but of course with other things, particularly with where you have these groups of people now starting to create their own truths. And this misinformation is damaging for society as a whole. But if we come back to cosmetics, when you need to communicate, should we say, the claims about your ingredients and those in your cosmetics, you have to understand basically the anatomy, as I call it, of a claim. And I describe this more in my book. But essentially, is if we are looking at a product, it moisturizes the skin, if we look at, should we say, a tree, so we have leaves, fruits and flowers, and these are the messages that marketing and advertising are giving to the consumer. So it all looks very beautiful, right? Because you have a product to sell. And so you need to ask a question, what the product says it does. Okay, it moisturizes the skin. I know it's a bit of a boring claim, but I need an example here. But then if we look at the trunk, you then have to say, okay, what the product says it does, but then you need to ask, well, what does the product actually do? And as we know that, for example, if you are using, should we say, some smart lipids or ceramides and the like, what it is actually doing, it's actually repairing the skin's barrier. And then you need to go one step further, where we're looking down in the roots of the tree, is why the product does what it does. And that is all the hard work that we put in as scientists based on all the scientific research and information that is continually generated about the understanding of the skin's barrier and basically the whole concept of skin moisturization. Now, those roots need to be fed. As we know, anybody who gardens knows that if you don't compost your garden, or if you don't feed your roses, they're not going to look very good. And also, as you know, some pruning needs to take place as itself. But this is the whole concept of understanding the anatomy of a claim. So if we bring it here, as here we are talking about, should we say, smart lipids and smart crystals and skin delivery and skin penetration, there are various cosmetic methods by which this can achieve. But it doesn't matter whether you are going to use injectables or lotion or those microcrystalline patches on the skin. You have to always bring it back to basics. What the product says it does, what it actually does, and why it does what it does. And so once you have basically managed to answer these questions, your communications to the consumer will help them manage their expectations a lot more effectively. And so what you need to do is to look at the expectations and the viewpoints in terms of factual information. So images and words, just the wrong image, for example, or the word, or even the way it's physically presented, can have a big impact on consumer perception, because consumers drive their expectation from the whole claim, not just part of it. Also, the expectations from the product. And you also need to understand the claims that you are creating. So you need to ask, well, okay, what is actually factual? So we know that by the using of a smart lipid or a smart crystal, we can actually improve the penetration below the stratum corneum into the epidermis. But what does that mean to the consumer? So what is it that we are actually implying from this? And we need to see it from the consumer viewpoint, and we need to provide a body of evidence that supports the whole claim. So that's why we need to be able to look at what the ingredients are, how they penetrate the skin, the product itself, the development of the claim, and how all that then basically feeds back into consumer relevance. Then we also come to the point, is at what point do we move from scientific facts, basically, which is what we work on, being expressed in vain terms. And so this is like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of thing. We also need to ask the question, well, okay, well, what do we mean by vanity? How vain are we? Does the industry carry responsibility for how vain we are? Because as we know, the cosmetic industry drives hard in terms of new concepts, new products, new needs, but does it also carry a responsibility for basically driving our vanity because of this? And so with that, I will answer this in this afternoon in the third event.